I never thought my grandson would be the one to uncover the truth I'd buried for decades. But that night, his whisper changed everything. The hall shimmered in gold and champagne light, every corner drenched in wealth and pretense. Laughter floated like perfume, and the air smelled of roses, lies, and money. It was my son's wedding, though I hadn't been truly invited. A courtesy seat far in the back, as though I were a relic too fragile for display. I remember clutching my small purse, pretending to smile, pretending to belong. But when I caught my reflection in the polished glass centerpiece, I saw what I'd become, a stranger in a family I once built with my own hands. Then it happened. A small shadow slipped behind me, a familiar presence I hadn't felt in years. My grandson, Adam. His voice was barely a breath when he leaned close and whispered, "Grandma, look under your chair." His tone carried a tremor of fear, urgency, something unspoken. My heart stumbled. "What is it, sweetheart?" But he'd already stepped away, vanishing into the crowd of satin dresses and hollow laughter. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, until I reached beneath my chair. My fingers brushed something rough, an envelope taped firmly underneath. I hesitated. My pulse roared in my ears as I peeled it free. The paper was yellowed at the edges, sealed with no name, no note, just weight. I slipped it open with shaking hands, expecting some childish prank, maybe a forgotten card. But when the photograph slid into my lap, the world stopped moving. My throat went dry. It was him. My husband. My dead husband. He was standing in front of a car I didn't recognize, his hand resting on someone's shoulder. And beside him, my daughter-in-law, the bride of my son, dressed not in her wedding gown but in a summer dress. The photo was dated 2 years ago, 2 years after his funeral. My fingers trembled so violently I almost dropped it. The edges of the picture cut my palm, but I barely felt the sting. I just kept staring, waiting for reason to return. It didn't. What kind of cruel joke was this? Was it Photoshop? Some sick attempt to torment me? But the light, the shadows, the way he smiled, it was all too real. The same crooked smile he'd given me the night before he died. The same watch on his wrist, the one I'd buried with him. I felt my stomach twist into knots. I looked around trying to spot Adam, but he was gone. The band was starting to play again. My son, Michael, stood on the stage with his new bride, the same woman from the photograph. They were laughing, glowing under the chandelier, every movement rehearsed to perfection. He raised his glass. "To love that conquers all," he said. The crowd cheered. I couldn't breathe. My gaze locked on her. The woman who'd once come to me for advice, who'd wept on my shoulder, who'd called me mom. And as she lifted her champagne, our eyes met. For a split second, she froze. A small, controlled smile spread across her lips, but there was something behind it. Recognition. Fear. Guilt. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream. But I sat frozen, clutching that photograph against my chest like a wound I couldn't hide. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the slow love song, they all blurred into a single suffocating sound. No one saw the tears brimming in my eyes. No one cared to. When I finally looked down again, the photo felt heavier, as if it carried not just a face, but a secret that had waited years to be found. I turned it over. Written in faint ink was a sentence that nearly stopped my heart. "He's not who you think." I remember whispering, "Who would do this to me?" But deep down, I already knew. Someone who wanted me to see. Someone who wanted me to wake up. My hands trembled as I slid the photo back into the envelope and tucked it into my purse. But even as I did, a chill ran down my spine. Because across the hall, standing beside the cake, was a man I hadn't seen in years. My husband's old business partner. He was staring straight at me. Our eyes met for a second too long. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then turned away. My breath caught in my throat. Why was he here? Why now? Was he the one who planted the photo? Or was he protecting someone? I wanted to confront him right then, but the lights dimmed. Michael's voice echoed again, toasting to love, loyalty, and new beginnings. The words sliced through me like a knife. Loyalty. My son didn't know the meaning of that word anymore. And then, the bride looked at me again. That same calm, knowing smile. I saw it clearly this time. The smallest twitch in her jaw, like she was daring me to speak, daring me to destroy her perfect moment. I didn't know then, but that smile was the first crack in a facade years in the making. When the applause thundered and the couple kissed, I barely noticed. All I could hear was the echo of my grandson's whisper. "Look under your chair." He'd known. Somehow that boy had known. And if he knew, it meant someone had told him. Which meant someone else was part of this. Someone close. I felt dizzy, clutching the edge of my chair for balance. My mind raced with questions. Was my husband truly alive? Had his death been faked? Was this woman, the new bride, involved somehow? The thought made my skin crawl. As the music swelled and the crowd began to dance, I gathered what little composure I had left and stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I needed air. I needed truth. I slipped out of the hall unnoticed, but before I reached the doors, I caught a final glimpse of my grandson near the buffet table, looking pale and anxious. When our eyes met, he mouthed a single word: "Sorry." And in that moment, I realized, whatever this was, whatever this photo meant, it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and Adam was caught in the middle of it. As I stepped out into the cool night, clutching the photograph like a secret heartbeat in my purse, one thought repeated in my mind, over and over again. He promised me he'd never lie to me. My husband, my son, my family, they all promised. And yet everything around me felt like a lie dressed in silk. The music inside grew louder, laughter spilling out into the night. But I couldn't move, because in my hands I held proof that death itself might have been a performance, and my family was the audience. I thought the wedding was about new beginnings. I didn't know it was the funeral of every truth I'd ever known. The day after my husband's funeral, I remember sitting in the kitchen, staring at his untouched cup of tea. It had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't throw it away. Somehow it made him feel still here. The chair across from me felt too empty, the silence too loud. He used to hum when he read the paper. That morning, all I could hear was the clock ticking, mocking me, reminding me that time doesn't stop, not even when your world does. I thought death would be final, clean. But grief lingers like fog. It doesn't leave. It just becomes part of the air you breathe. People told me to move on, as if it were something you could pack in a box and forget. I didn't move on. I moved around it. For Daniel's sake. My son needed me more than ever then. His wife had left him just months after giving birth. Claiming motherhood wasn't her path. He was broken, humiliated, trying to be both father and mother to little Adam. I remember telling him, "You don't have to do this alone." And I meant it. I sold my bangles. The gold necklace my husband had gifted me on our 20th anniversary. Even my wedding ring, to pay off the mortgage and help Daniel start his business. He looked at me with tears in his eyes that day and said, "When I make it big, you'll never want for anything again, Mom. I promise." I believed him. Because I wanted to. I wanted to think that all the sacrifices meant something. But promises have a way of sounding like lullabies when you're desperate to sleep through pain. The years that followed were quiet, almost peaceful. Daniel's company grew faster than anyone expected. There were interviews, newspaper articles, pictures of him shaking hands with people in suits. He'd stop by once or twice a week with Adam, drop groceries on the table, kiss my forehead, and rush off. "Busy day, Mom. I'll stay longer next time." Next time. That phrase became our rhythm, and I convinced myself it was enough. But slowly the calls got shorter. Birthdays became texts, and dinners turned into deliveries left at my door. He wasn't unkind, just distant. Like he'd built a new world that didn't have space for the woman who built his old one. Still, I kept his house clean when he traveled. Cooked for Adam when the nanny didn't show. I didn't complain. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We hold the pieces together, even when nobody's watching. Then one evening, he brought her home. The new fiancée. Her name was Elise. Beautiful, polished, with a quiet smile that could freeze a room. The moment she stepped into my kitchen, I felt something in my stomach twist. Her perfume reminded me of someone I couldn't place. She reached out her hand, and for a second I hesitated. Her skin was soft, too soft. Like someone who'd never scrubbed a floor or carried a crying child through the night. Daniel was glowing beside her. He said, "Mom, this is Elise. She's everything I ever wanted." I smiled, pretending to share his joy. But as I looked at her, the way she watched me, the way her eyes lingered on the framed wedding photo of my husband on the wall, I felt it. That tiny crawling sensation of wrongness. I pushed it away. Told myself I was being paranoid. After all, hadn't grief made me suspicious of everyone? But that night, I couldn't sleep. Her face kept replaying in my mind. That subtle smirk when she looked at my husband's picture. The way she avoided touching Daniel's hand in front of me. It wasn't love I saw in her eyes, it was calculation. The kind that comes from knowing more than you're supposed to. Days turned into weeks, and strange things began to happen. A photograph missing from the mantel. A letter my husband had written me on our anniversary. Gone. I searched everywhere. Daniel brushed it off, said maybe I'd misplaced it. But I don't misplace things. Especially not memories. Then came the day of the watch. My husband's watch. The one I buried with him. I had chosen it myself. Tucked it gently beside his folded hands in that coffin, whispering, "So you're never late to meet me again." I was cleaning Daniel's study while he and Elise were out of town when I found it, in his desk drawer. The same watch, the same engraving on the back. To H, my forever. My breath caught. My vision blurred. For a moment, I thought my heart had stopped. When Daniel returned, I asked him about it. He froze, just for a second, but I saw it. "Oh, that old thing?" he said, forcing a laugh. "I must have found it at an estate sale or something. Thought it looked familiar." I didn't believe him. Neither did Elise. She was standing by the door, clutching her wine glass, her knuckles white. When our eyes met, she flinched, like she'd seen a ghost. That night, I couldn't eat. Couldn't think. Every detail from the funeral came flooding back. The closed casket, the hastily arranged paperwork. The way Daniel refused to let me see the body, because it would be too painful. At the time, I'd trusted him. He was grieving too. Or at least he seemed to be. But now doubt crept in, slow and poisonous. What if I had buried an empty coffin? The next morning, Adam stopped by before school. He looked nervous, distant. I asked if everything was all right. He just shrugged and said, "Dad and Elise said not to bother you too much, Grandma. You need your rest." His words pierced deeper than any knife. That wasn't my grandson speaking. That was someone repeating a script. The same boy who used to run into my arms was now afraid to stay too long. I started noticing other things. Bank letters missing. My mailbox tampered with. One afternoon, I caught Elise standing by my study door, pretending to admire the wallpaper. When I asked what she was doing, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I was just curious how you keep everything so organized." Her tone was calm, but her eyes were cold. The kind of cold that doesn't come from weather, but from a plan. That night, I sat on my bed holding the watch, running my thumb over the engraving until the letters blurred. And that's when I made a decision. I needed answers, real ones. Because deep down, I was beginning to suspect that what I thought was my life had been rewritten without me noticing. A week later, I went to the bank. I told them I needed to check on my husband's old insurance claim, just to update records. The clerk frowned, clicked a few keys, and said, "It was settled years ago, ma'am." I nodded. Of course, it had been. But when she handed me the confirmation printout, my blood ran cold. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It wasn't the lawyer's, it was a shaky, half-familiar scrawl that looked disturbingly like his. I left the bank trembling, the paper clutched in my hand. Outside, the air felt too thin. My knees nearly gave out on the steps. I wanted to believe it was a clerical error, a mix-up. But the date beside the signature, 2 years ago, matched the one on the photograph I'd found under my chair at the wedding. And that's when everything started making sense. The missing photos. The watch. Elise's knowing eyes. Daniel's growing distance. They weren't coincidences. They were signs. Pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blinded by love to see. What would you do if your own child started hiding pieces of your past from you? Would you confront him, or pretend not to notice just to keep the illusion of family intact? I thought I'd choose peace. But peace built on lies is just silence wearing a mask. That night, I called Daniel. Told him I needed to talk. He didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. The next morning, a delivery arrived. A bouquet of lilies and a small card that read, "Stop digging into the past. It doesn't belong to you anymore. No name. No sender." But the handwriting looked hauntingly familiar. I tore the card apart and sank to the floor. The tears came quietly this time. Not out of sadness, but realization. Someone was warning me, threatening me. And it wasn't just about money. It was about control. It was never about money. It was about control. Later that week, I visited Adam's school. I needed to see him to know he was safe. The teacher told me he'd been picked up early by his stepmother. My heart stopped. Elise wasn't his stepmother, not yet. I rushed to Daniel's house, pounding on the door, but no one answered. Through the window, I could see the living room, empty except for a single framed photo on the mantel. It was new. Daniel, Elise, and Adam, smiling like they'd already erased me from their lives. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring through that glass. Minutes. Hours, maybe. I just remember whispering, "You promised me," like saying it enough times could undo it all. But promises don't heal. They just echo in the ruins they leave behind. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another blow, I found it. Folded inside an old ledger I kept in my drawer, tucked between unpaid bills and memories I couldn't afford to face. A receipt. Old, crumpled, but legible. Dated 2 years after my husband's death. It was a withdrawal slip from his life insurance account. Signed in the same shaky hand I'd seen at the bank. And in the signature line, clear as daylight, was his name. Henry. I stared at that paper until the words blurred. My hands shook. My breath came in shallow gasps. If he was dead, who signed this? And if he wasn't, where had he been all this time? That's when the truth hit me. Not like a whisper, but like a scream buried under years of denial. I'd spent years mourning a man who might never have died, and living under the roof of a son who might have known it all along. And then I discovered the first receipt, with my dead husband's name on it. I don't believe in ghosts, I whispered to myself that night, clutching the flickering candle on my kitchen table. But then why does his handwriting still appear on letters postmarked last week? The paper trembled in my hands, that unmistakable loop in the G, the way he always crossed his T just a little too high. My late husband's signature, dated years after I buried him. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. It felt haunted. Not by a spirit, but by secrets. I started going through Daniel's office after everyone slept. At first, I told myself it was to clean, to organize, to make sense of the chaos. But deep down, I knew I was searching for something, anything, that could explain the impossible. Night after night, I opened drawers, thumbed through folders, and stared at papers that smelled faintly of cigar smoke and deceit. There were insurance documents with my husband's name, a policy renewed 5 years after his death. And each time I tried to convince myself it was some clerical error, I'd find a withdrawal slip, a signature, a date that mocked me. One night, I found a photograph I'd never seen before, Daniel, standing beside his fiancée, the same woman from the wedding. But what froze me wasn't them. It was the background. The cabin. The same cabin my husband used to retreat to when he said he needed space. I could almost hear the crunch of gravel under his boots, the sound of that old door creaking open. My pulse quickened. How could that place appear again, in a photo from just months ago? From then on, sleep became a stranger. I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, convinced someone was standing just outside my door. The floors creaked at odd hours. Daniel's fiancée would walk through the hallway barefoot, her phone glowing in her hand. Once, I caught her staring at an old family portrait on the wall, the one that had my husband in it. When she noticed me watching, she smiled. Too softly, too long, and said, "You must miss him terribly." There was no reason her words should have made my stomach twist, but they did. Because behind her gentle tone was something else. Pity, maybe even satisfaction. From that night on, I started locking my door. Then came the change in Jacob, my grandson. Sweet, bright Jacob, the only light left in that house. He stopped calling me Grandma. He'd say, "Dad said I should call you Mrs. Harlow for a while." At first, I laughed it off, thinking it was some childish prank. But when I asked him who told him that, he'd look at the floor, hands trembling, and whisper, "Mom said not to tell you. Mom." That word hit me like a blade. His real mother had been gone for years. So who was he calling Mom? One evening, I asked Jacob to help me with groceries. As he bent to pick up a bag, a small keychain slipped out of his pocket, a brass charm shaped like a cabin. My chest went cold. I asked him where he got it, and his eyes filled with tears. "She said it was from Grandpa," he said quietly. "She said he's watching over us." That night, I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me. Had I buried the wrong man? Days passed in a haze of suspicion and dread. I started noticing things I shouldn't have, small details that seemed out of place. The garden lights would flicker in perfect rhythm, like signals. Mail I never sent would return unopened. Even the family dog began barking at Daniel's study door, low and guttural, whenever the fiancé was inside. Then, one night, I heard it. A sharp whisper carried through the garden window. I crept closer, holding my breath. Daniel's voice, low and urgent. If she finds out what we did, it's over. And then hers. Then make sure she never finds out. The air left my lungs. My son, my only son, sounded terrified. But terrified of what? I pressed a hand against the cold glass, trying to steady myself. My reflection looked pale. Foreign. Almost ghostly. When I turned around, Jacob was standing in the doorway. He'd heard it too. His face was white as chalk. "Grandma," he whispered, "please don't tell them I told you." That night I sat at the kitchen table, with every document I had, the insurance forms, the letters, the photographs. I laid them out like puzzle pieces, trying to build a truth I wasn't ready to see. My husband's name appeared everywhere, but in different handwriting styles, like someone had forged him, then tried too hard to make it perfect. Still, one page was different. One letter felt real. It said, in his familiar uneven scrawl, "Don't trust Daniel. Don't trust who he's with. I'm not dead." My hands shook so badly the paper slipped from my fingers. Not dead. The words burned into my mind. If that was true, then who was buried under his name? 2 days later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no explanation. Just a small piece of plastic, and the faint smell of pine. I plugged it into my computer, my breath uneven. The screen flickered and a video began to play. A dimly lit cabin. A frail man hunched over a table. His voice trembled. "Please, stop sending her money. You promised me you'd let me go." It was him. My husband. Alive. The sound of my own sobs startled me. His eyes darted around the room as if he feared someone was watching. "If she finds out," he said, "it's over for both of us." And then, a shadow passed behind him. Tall, male, familiar. For a moment, I thought it was Daniel. I replayed the footage over and over, counting the seconds, memorizing the details, the way the window blinds swayed, the faint hum of crickets outside. There was a timestamp in the corner. 3 months ago. That's when I realized someone else was filming him. Someone who wanted me to see this. The next morning, Jacob came to the kitchen looking pale and sick. He clutched his backpack tightly. "Grandma," he said, "if someone sends you something, don't tell Dad." My heart sank. He knew. He'd been the messenger all along. I tried to reach for him, but he pulled away. "He said they'd hurt me if I talked," he whispered. "What would you do, I ask you, if your own child's fear confirmed your worst nightmare?" I confronted Daniel that evening. I didn't mention the video, just asked about the cabin. He smiled, too calmly, and said, "Mother, that place burned down years ago. You're confused." Then, almost tenderly, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've been through a lot. Maybe it's time to let the past stay buried." But the thing about the past is, it never stays buried when it's clawing its way out. That night, I returned to the video and noticed something I'd missed before. In the reflection of the cabin's window, a second face appeared, the fiancé's. She was smiling. I don't remember when I started shaking, only that I couldn't stop. The video ended abruptly, cutting to black. And then, another file appeared. A folder labeled simply, "Confession," and though my hands trembled and my heart begged me not to click it, I did. When I finally clicked on the file labeled "Confession," I expected another lie. Another layer of manipulation crafted to keep me doubting my own sanity. But what played next was something else entirely. A voice, shaking, weary, and undeniably his. My husband. "If she ever finds out," he said between shallow breaths. Tell her I'm sorry. I didn't know Daniel would go this far. I thought it was just business. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The voice I had mourned for years filled the room again, but now it spoke of betrayal, deception, and guilt. It was the sound of a man dying not from illness, but from secrets. That night, as the words echoed through the dark, something inside me hardened. For decades, I'd swallowed humiliation. I'd believed that silence kept families safe, but I was wrong. Silence only feeds the wolves. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Mr. Collins, stern, gray-haired, and the kind of man who didn't waste words. When I showed him the documents, the insurance files, and the flash drive, he stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Mrs. Harlow, he said quietly, if what you're telling me is true, your husband's death wasn't just a fraud. It's a felony, possibly two. We began digging. Every record, every account, every signature Daniel had ever filed. The deeper we went, the uglier it became. There were fake death certificates, forged signatures, and bank accounts in offshore names, some even under mine. My husband's life insurance had been cashed twice. The handwriting on the claim matched Daniel's. And the woman he was engaged to now? She had once worked for the same firm that processed my husband's estate. One evening, Mr. Collins leaned back in his chair and said, "This wasn't an accident. This was a plan that had taken years to build, and one I had unknowingly funded." That night, I decided to confront him, not as a mother, but as a woman who'd been betrayed for far too long. I walked into his office just before closing. The lights were low, the air heavy with cologne and deceit. He looked up from his desk, smiling that same confident, polished smile he used when reporters came around. "Mother," he said, "you shouldn't be here." "I found your father," I said. For the first time, his pen stopped midair. "Excuse me?" I said I found him. Or rather, I found proof that he never died. I slid the flash drive across his desk. "Watch it." He hesitated, then clicked play. The video began. The cabin, the pleading, the voice. As the words filled the room, I watched his expression shift from irritation to disbelief, and then to fear. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "You've been manipulated," he said softly. "You're old, tired. They're using you." "Who's they?" I asked. He stood, walking around the desk. "Mother, this obsession of yours, it's dangerous. You could ruin everything." "Everything?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean your inheritance? Your perfect image?" He sighed. "You don't understand. I did this for you." That was when she walked in. The fiancé. Her heels clicked like a metronome of control. "What's going on here?" she asked, eyes darting to the screen. When she saw the video, her face went pale. "You said the files were destroyed." Daniel shot her a glare. "Get out." But she didn't. She looked at me, voice trembling. He promised me this was all taken care of. In that single moment, everything was laid bare. Their alliance, their deceit, their guilt. Before I left, I leaned over Daniel's desk and whispered, "You promised me I'd never want for anything again. You were right, because I no longer want you." That night, I barely slept. I packed every document, every file, every recording into a small lockbox. My plan was simple: give everything to the lawyer and let the truth burn through their lies. But when I woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke, I knew someone else had a plan too. The fire started in the study, the one room that held all my evidence. By the time I reached it, the flames had eaten through half the floor. I tried to grab the lockbox, but the heat was unbearable. I screamed for help, but no one came. The smoke was thick, black, choking. I stumbled to the kitchen, barely able to see. My lungs burned, my throat raw. And then, through the haze, I saw him. Jacob. Standing outside, crying. He was shouting my name, trying to get through the door, but someone pulled him back. A dark figure, taller, broader, Daniel. I will never forget that look on his face. Not panic, not fear. Control. When I finally made it out, the fire department said it was an electrical fault. But I knew better. I'd seen the can of lighter fluid in the hallway earlier that day. Mr. Collins met me at the hospital later, eyes grave. "You need protection," he said. "And you need to stop investigating." "I can't stop," I told him. "Not now." He rubbed his temples. "Then at least be smart. Keep backups, hidden ones." And that's when the idea struck me. I bought a small camera, one of those discreet ones you can hide in a picture frame. Every night I sat in front of it and recorded myself. The truth, my fear, my evidence, my voice trembling through each confession. "If I die," I said to the lens, "they die with me." Each video ended the same way, with me holding a picture of my husband. I wanted them to know that I wasn't crazy, that love, even after betrayal, could still fight back. The last tape I made was for Jacob. I hid it inside his school bag, tucked between his notebooks. In it, I told him everything, every secret, every truth, every lie his father had told. "You're the only one who can end this," I said, "because you still know what love feels like." But as I sat there, recording those words, I couldn't shake the dread that maybe I was signing his death sentence too. The next morning, Daniel arrived unannounced. His tone was sweet, but his eyes were sharp. "Mother," he said, "I heard about the fire. You really should move in with us. It's not safe here." I smiled politely. "I'll be fine." He leaned closer, whispering, "You shouldn't keep anything dangerous lying around. Someone might get hurt." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. That night, I sent a copy of everything to Mr. Collins, and another to an anonymous address I'd found in my husband's old ledger. It was labeled Attorney of Record. I didn't know who it belonged to, but I knew one thing. If something happened to me, the truth would not die in smoke and silence. For weeks, nothing happened. Daniel acted normal, the fiancée busied herself with wedding plans, and Jacob grew distant. But I could feel it, the storm gathering just beneath the surface. Then came the letter. A court summons. My name printed in bold letters. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It was about fraud. And Daniel had filed it against me. He wanted to destroy me before I could destroy him. But he didn't know what I had left. He didn't know that every lie, every forged signature, every whispered threat had been recorded. I wasn't walking into that courtroom as a broken mother. I was walking in as the woman they tried to bury, and failed. And when the judge called my name, the entire courtroom fell silent, I swear. I could feel my heart pounding louder than the crowd outside that courthouse. That morning, as I stepped out of the car, the air itself felt heavy, like it was waiting to judge me before anyone else did. Cameras flashed in my face. Reporters screamed questions I didn't have the strength to answer. But I held my head high. After all these years of silence, humiliation, and fear, I was finally ready to let the truth speak for itself. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every face I had once loved sat on the opposite side of the room. Daniel, his fiancée, my daughter-in-law, even Jacob. My sweet Jacob, who couldn't even look me in the eye. I could feel their hatred, their betrayal, their quiet pleading for me to stop this madness. But it wasn't madness, it was justice. He promised me he'd always protect this family. He promised me I'd never have to fight alone. And yet here I was, the only one brave or foolish enough to stand against them all. When the judge called my name, I rose. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. "Your Honor," my lawyer began, his tone cutting through the whispers like a blade. "This is not just a case about fraud. It's about the murder of truth." The words echoed in the hall. The fiancée shifted nervously in her seat, her eyes darting toward Daniel, searching for reassurance. But he sat still, jaw clenched as if carved from stone. I could almost see the calculations spinning behind his calm smile. That's what made him dangerous. He never shouted. He never lost control. He'd destroy you gently, with a smirk. Then the evidence began to unfold. Documents, bank transfers, fake death certificates. Piece by piece, their carefully woven story began to unravel. I watched Daniel's composure crumble, like frost melting under sunlight. His lawyer tried to object, but the proof was too solid, too damning. When they played the video, the same one from the flash drive, the entire room gasped. There he was, My husband, alive, frail, begging to be released. I didn't know then whether to scream or cry, but I knew I was right. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't delusional. They had kept him hidden all these years, but what happened next left me speechless. The fiancé suddenly broke. She buried her face in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. "It was Daniel," she screamed. "He made me do it. I didn't want to fake it, I swear I didn't want to." The room fell silent. Daniel's mask shattered in an instant. He lunged toward her, shouting, "Shut up! You don't know what you're talking about." But the damage was done. Every camera in the room turned toward him, his face pale, his voice cracking. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a spectacle. He turned toward me, eyes burning with something between hatred and fear. "You think this makes you a hero?" he sneered. "You've destroyed this family." I stared back at him and said quietly, "It was never about money, it was about control." And for the first time in his life, he had none. The judge called for order, but it was already chaos. Reporters whispered. My lawyer motioned for calm. And then, from the gallery, a voice I will never forget echoed across the courtroom. "You can't hide anymore, Dad!" It was Jacob. My grandson stood there, trembling but defiant, tears streaming down his face. "I saw what you did. I saw everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel froze, his mouth half open, as the gallery broke into murmurs. Even the judge looked stunned. In that moment, the power shifted. My grandson, the same boy who had once been too afraid to speak, became the final witness. "He told me never to tell Grandma," Jacob said, his voice breaking. But I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Grandpa in that video. I thought he was a ghost. But he was real. The truth spilled out of that child like confession from a soul too young to carry such weight. Daniel tried to rise, to object, but the bailiff stopped him. His fiancée sobbed uncontrollably. My lawyer leaned close and whispered, "We've won." But I didn't feel victorious. Just hollow. Because when the gavel finally struck and the judge announced guilty on all counts, the room erupted, but I didn't move. Justice isn't peace. It's just the absence of lies. Later, they asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood before the microphones, eyes scanning the crowd. "I lost my husband once to deceit," I said softly. "And I lost my son to greed. But today, I found my voice again." My words trembled, but my heart didn't. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear my husband's voice, weak but proud. But what happened after court? That's what still haunts me. As they led Daniel away, Jacob ran to me, crying into my arms. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he whispered. "I didn't mean to keep the secret." I kissed his forehead and said, "It's not your fault, my love. You told the truth. That's what saves us." For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. Not of Daniel, not of the whispers, not even of the future. Because when the truth finally came out, it didn't destroy me. It freed me, and in that silence, I realized I was finally free. I thought the truth would bring peace. But it didn't. Not right away. In the weeks after the trial, my house felt colder than ever. The silence that once comforted me had turned into something else. Something heavy, echoing with everything we'd lost. My husband passed away not long after the verdict. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was something deeper. Too many years of being hidden, silenced, forgotten. When they handed me his wedding ring, I didn't cry. I just held it in my palm and whispered, "You can rest now." It's over, but was it? Some nights I'd wake to the sound of the front gate creaking, half expecting Daniel to walk in, smirking like nothing had ever happened. He promised me he'd never become his father, and yet in the end he became worse. His name was splashed across newspapers for weeks. Son fakes father's death for fortune. The world devoured our pain like gossip, then moved on. But I couldn't. Because when the noise faded, I was left with what betrayal truly feels like. Not fire, not anger, but emptiness. Jacob stayed with me after everything. He refused to go back to his mother's house. He'd wake from nightmares crying, "I didn't mean to lie, Grandma." I'd hold him, stroke his hair, and say, "You told the truth when it mattered. That's what makes you brave." Watching him study at the kitchen table, I sometimes caught the same look in his eyes that his father once had, the restless hunger for approval. But I was determined to break that pattern. I'd tell him, You don't have to be perfect, Jacob. You just have to be honest. A few months later, I decided to sell the house. Too many memories were buried in those walls. The whispers, the arguments, the lies that nearly consumed us. When the realtor asked if I was sure, I said, "Yes, this house was built on secrets. I want my next one built on truth." The day I handed over the keys, I felt something lift off my chest, like I was finally leaving a battlefield that had already taken too much. I used part of the money to start something small, a foundation called The Silenced. It was for families like mine, people trapped in webs of deceit, too afraid to speak. I remember the first woman who came to me, a mother who hadn't seen her son in 10 years because her husband forged court papers. As she told me her story, I saw a reflection of myself. Shaking hands, broken voice, desperate hope. I held her hand and said, "You are not alone. The truth doesn't destroy families. Secrets do." But even in rebuilding, there were moments that tore me apart. One afternoon, while packing old things, I found a box at the back of my husband's closet. Inside were letters, dozens of them, addressed to me but never sent. Most were gentle, filled with love and regret. But one stopped my breath. It was dated just weeks before Daniel staged his death. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. If they ever turn on you, don't let them make you small. I sat there on the floor, clutching that letter to my chest. For years, I had let their betrayal shrink me, made myself quieter, weaker, smaller. But reading those words, I finally understood. He had known. Somehow he'd seen the storm coming, and this was his way of leaving me a weapon, not a knife, not vengeance, but strength. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it to my lips, and whispered, "I won't." Sometimes Jacob catches me talking to the photograph of his grandfather. "Do you miss him?" he asks. I smile and say, "Every day." But missing isn't the same as mourning. He's free now, and so am I. Then Jacob hugs me, tighter than he used to, and for a fleeting moment I feel something close to peace. There are still days when the world tests me. Letters from journalists wanting interviews, neighbors pretending not to stare when I pass. And sometimes I catch a headline about Daniel's appeal. He's serving his sentence now. The fiancée disappeared completely. Rumors say she changed her name, fled abroad. I don't hate them anymore. Hate is just another kind of chain, and I've broken enough of those for one lifetime. You know, people often ask, if you could go back, would you still expose them? And every time I think about Jacob's face in that courtroom, standing up against his father's lies. Then I say, yes. 1,000 times, yes. Because justice doesn't just punish, it heals. Slowly. Quietly. Tell me something. What would you have done if your own child betrayed you for money? Would you protect them to keep the family intact? Or would you burn down the lies to save what's left of your soul? I've lived both sides, and I can tell you this. Silence kills. Now, as I sit by the window in my new home, sunlight spilling over the floor, I finally feel like I can breathe again. Jacob's laughter fills the rooms where guilt used to live. I still wear my husband's ring, his final reminder that truth isn't cruelty. It's freedom. Every morning I read that line from his letter, and I start my day stronger than before, and that's when I learned the truth. Freedom is the greatest inheritance.